The Pennsylvania night stretched endlessly, a canvas of darkness painted with streaks of silver lightning. The clouds were thick and heavy, as though they carried not just rain, but secrets waiting to be poured onto the earth. The road that cut through the quiet countryside was slick with water, shining like black glass under the headlights of a lone luxury car gliding through the storm. Inside the car, Ethan Maxwell sat behind the wheel, his strong hands gripping the leather steering tightly. He had always been a man in control of his business, his wealth, his empire, but tonight an unfamiliar heaviness pressed against his chest. The rhythmic sweep of the windshield wipers kept time with his thoughts, clearing away the rain only for more to come, just like the memories he tried to push away, but which always returned. Ethan Maxwell was the kind of man people admired and envied. Billionaire, investor, visionary. His name was in business magazines, his face on finance networks. Every decision he made sent ripples through the economy. He had everything that should have made a man happy: mansions, cars, private jets, a staff ready to serve his every whim. Yet, as his car cut through the dark road, his life felt strangely empty. His assistant had tried to convince him to stay another night in New York after the deal they had just closed, to celebrate their victory. They had secured a merger worth hundreds of millions, a move that would make Maxwell Industries even more untouchable. His colleagues had toasted to his brilliance, calling him unstoppable, a man who always got what he wanted. But all their praise sounded hollow to Ethan. He hadn't celebrated. Instead, he had left early, refusing the champagne and laughter, choosing the long, solitary drive back to Pennsylvania. He told himself he just wanted to sleep in his own bed. But deep down, he knew why he was driving through the storm tonight. Because no amount of money, no skyscraper deal, no magazine cover could silence the memory of the woman he had once loved and lost. Claire. Even her name was a wound he kept reopening. 2 years had passed since she had walked out his life, but every corner of the mansion still whispered her presence. Her laughter still seemed to echo faintly in the halls, a sound he had taken for granted when she was there. Her favorite mug was still in the kitchen cabinet, though no one dared touch it. And every time he opened the door to the master bedroom, the emptiness hit him like a punch to the gut. He had told himself he was fine, that he was better off without distractions. He buried himself in work, built his empire higher, faster, bigger. And yet, the silence of success was unbearable. Tonight, it was louder than ever. The rain grew heavier, hammering the windshield like impatient fingers. Ethan adjusted his grip on the steering wheel and leaned back slightly, trying to ease the tension in his shoulders. The road ahead glistened as if inviting him forward, but there was an ache in his chest that told him he wasn't just driving home. He was driving towards something else, something he couldn't name. As the miles passed, his thoughts drifted further into the past, to the nights he used to share with Claire. He remembered the way she loved rainy nights, how she would sit by the window wrapped in a blanket, a cup of tea in her hands, watching the storm like it was a private show just for her. She used to tell him the rain made her feel alive, as though it washed away all the noise of the world. He used to watch her then, and even if he had 100 unread emails and 1,000 problems to solve, for a few minutes he would forget it all. She had been his calm in the chaos, the soft place he could fall when the world outside was relentless. But he had let work pull him away. Little by little, late nights at the office replaced dinners at home. Phone calls during vacations replaced quiet walks. He had been so focused on giving her the future he thought she deserved that he forgot to give her the present she needed. And then came the fight. He could still see her standing in the living room that night, her eyes red from crying, her hands shaking. She had begged him to slow down, to just be there for her, even if it meant less money, fewer deals. But Ethan had been too proud, too stubborn. He had told her she didn't understand what he was building for them. She had looked at him for a long moment, heartbreak written all over her face, before saying the words that still haunted him. "You're building a future I don't want to live in." And with that, she had walked out, leaving him standing there, too shocked to follow. The memory tightened around his chest like a vice. Ethan blinked hard, pulling himself back to the present as thunder rumbled overhead. The car's heater hummed softly, filling the cabin with warmth, but he still felt cold. He pressed his foot down slightly, speeding up, Maybe it was just a storm making him feel this way, nostalgic, restless, raw. Or maybe it was something else, something bigger. The mansion wasn't far now. He would go home, take a hot shower, pour himself a drink, and pretend once again that his life was exactly how he wanted it. That was his routine. That was what he did. And yet, for some reason, tonight didn't feel like every other night. Tonight felt like something was about to change. The storm was relentless now. Rain lashed against the windshield like a curtain of silver needles, forcing Ethan to slow down as he turned onto the narrow back road that led toward his estate. The wipers swiped back and forth in a hypnotic rhythm. But visibility was still poor, just a wall of water illuminated in flashes by the headlights. He leaned forward slightly, his brow furrowed, focused on the road ahead. It was nearly midnight, and this stretch of countryside was usually deserted at this hour. But then, as the car rounded a curve, a shadow appeared in the distance. At first, he thought it was nothing, a tree branch swaying, maybe a stray animal crossing the road. But as the car rolled closer, his headlights caught something that made his chest seize. It was a person. A lone figure stood at the side of the road, completely exposed to the downpour, as though they had been swallowed by the storm. They weren't waving for help or trying to flag him down. They were simply standing there, unmoving, clutching something close to their body. Ethan's foot eased off the accelerator instinctively, and the car slowed to a crawl. His heart began to pound in an odd, uneven rhythm. It was strange. Something about the silhouette was familiar. As he drew closer, the headlights illuminated the figure more clearly. It was a woman. Her soaked dress clung to her body. Her hair plastered her face and neck. She looked fragile under the merciless rain, her arms wrapped around her midsection as though she were trying to shield herself, or something else, from the storm. And then the light caught her face. Ethan's world tilted. His breath caught in his throat, and for a second, he forgot how to breathe at all. It was Claire. For one disorienting moment, he thought he must be dreaming or hallucinating. He had imagined her face so many times over the past 2 years that maybe, just maybe, his mind was playing tricks on him. But this wasn't a memory or a fantasy. This was real. Claire stood there, in the middle of nowhere, under a storm that threatened to drown the earth. And she was pregnant. The sight hit Ethan harder than any boardroom betrayal, harder than any financial loss he had ever taken. His hands tightened around the steering wheel until his knuckles turned white. Every detail about her in that moment carved itself into his memory. The way her hair stuck to her cheeks, the way her lips were slightly parted as she panted from exhaustion, the way her free hand rested protectively over the curve of her swollen belly. His car rolled to stop a few feet away, but Ethan just sat there, frozen. It was as though time had slowed down. The storm muted to a dull roar around him. 100 emotions collided inside him at once: shock, confusion, longing, anger, guilt. He didn't know whether to open the door and run to her, or slam the gas and drive away, pretending he had seen nothing. He had dreamed about seeing her again countless times. In those dreams, she always looked the way she had before, radiant, smiling, teasing him about being too serious. He never imagined their reunion like this. Under a sky that seemed to cry with them, her body trembling, her face pale, carrying a child. And not just any child. His mind screamed the question before he could stop it. Whose child was it? A sharp pang of jealousy rose in his chest at the thought of her with someone else. The idea that another man had given her what had failed to: love, attention, maybe even happiness, was unbearable. But then another, even more devastating thought struck him. What if the baby was his? What if this was a life he had thrown away? Not just with Claire, but with a child he had never known existed. The weight of that possibility nearly crushed him. Ethan's hand hovered over the car door handle, his pulse racing. He could still drive away. She hadn't seen him yet. Her head was bowed, her face hidden by the curtain of rain. If he left now, he could go back to his perfectly controlled life, pretend this never happened. But he knew he wouldn't. For 2 years, he had lived with regret like a second skin, carrying it into every meeting, every empty night. And now fate had placed her right in front of him, in the most vulnerable state he had ever seen her. He couldn't leave. He turned off the engine, and the silence inside the car was deafening. The rain hammered on the roof like a drum, as though urging him forward. He pushed the door open, and a rush of cold, wet air hit him instantly. His perfectly tailored suit was soaked within seconds, but he barely noticed. His shoes splashed in the puddles as he stepped out into the storm, his eyes never leaving her. "Claire." His voice cut through the rain, sharp and desperate. She flinched, her head jerking up. For a second, she just stared, disbelief written across her face. The headlights illuminated every detail of her expression, the widening of her eyes, the slight parting of her lips. "Ethan," she whispered, though the sound was nearly lost in the storm. He took a step closer, his heart hammering. "What are you doing out here? You'll get sick." But Claire didn't move. She just stood there, clutching her belly tighter, as if bracing herself against more than just the rain. Seeing her like that, fragile, drenched, exhausted, broke something inside Ethan. This wasn't the confident, laughing woman he remembered. This was someone who looked like she had been through a war, and he couldn't shake the gnawing feeling that part of that war had been because of him. For a few heartbeats, neither of them spoke again. The storm raged around them, but the space between them felt like a vacuum, holding its breath. Ethan took another step forward, then another, until he was only a few feet away. He could see her shivering now, her lips turning slightly blue from the cold. Every instinct in him screamed to reach out, to pull her into his arms, to protect her, not just from the rain, but from whatever had brought her to this road in the first place. But he stayed where he was, unsure if he still had the right. "Claire," he said again, softer this time, almost pleading. "Please, get in the car. It's warm. You shouldn't be out here." Her eyes met his then, and he saw everything he had feared: pain, anger, betrayal. And just like that, he knew this night was about to change everything. The rain dripping off Claire's hair brought Ethan back to a memory that felt as sharp as broken glass. The night everything fell apart. 2 years ago, their home had been a place of light and warmth. Claire had filled it with soft music, fresh flowers, and her endless laughter. But over time, that laughter grew quieter. The mansion that once felt alive began to feel like a museum, beautiful but empty. Ethan had been too focused on his empire to notice the change right away. There was always a deal to close, a meeting to prepare for, a flight to catch. When Claire first started complaining that he was never home, he brushed it off, promising that things will calm down after this quarter. But they never did. One memory, in particular, burned brightest. It had been a rainy evening, much like tonight. Ethan had returned home late. So late that Claire had already eaten dinner alone. The table was still set for 2, but one plate sat cold, untouched. He found her in the living room, sitting silently on the couch, staring at the fire. "You're home," she had said, her voice quiet, not looking at him. "Yes," Ethan had replied, loosening his tie, glancing at his phone one last time before pocketing it. "The deal finally went through. We did it, Claire. Maxwell Industries just acquired Rosen Tech. This is huge." She turned to him then, her expression unreadable. "That's great, Ethan. Congratulations." But there was no excitement in her voice. "Is something wrong?" he asked, walking over to her. She shook her head, but her eyes glistened with unshed tears. "Nothing you haven't heard before. That was the night the fight began, the fight that would end their marriage. Claire," he said, sighing, sitting beside her, "we've talked about this. Everything I'm doing for us, for our future." Her voice cracked. "What future? The one where you're too busy to be here? The one where I eat dinner alone every night? The one where you kiss your phone good night more than you kiss me?" Ethan felt frustration stir in his chest. "This is how the world works, Claire. You knew who I was when you married me. You knew my work mattered to me." "I didn't marry your work, Ethan," she snapped, her eyes finally spilling tears. "I married you." Her words cut through him, but his pride wouldn't let him show it. "You think I don't want to be here? You think I enjoy missing dinners and vacations? This isn't just work to me. It's our security, our legacy." "I don't want your legacy," she shouted, standing up now, her voice trembling. "I don't want the mansion or the cars or the accounts full of money. I just want you. I just want a man who used to sit with me on rainy nights and talk about dreams that didn't involve stock prices. He stood too, his frustration boiling over. I can't just throw away everything I built because you're lonely for a few months. Claire's hands clenched at her sides, her chest heaving. It's been more than a few months, Ethan. It's been years. And every time I ask you to slow down, you promise me you will, and then you don't. Her voice broke completely then. You know how many times I've gone to bed crying, wishing you'd just walk through the door and hold me? Do you know how many times I've thought about leaving, just to see if you'd notice? Something inside Ethan twisted painfully, but he hardened his tone. You're being dramatic. This is just a rough patch. Once the business stabilizes. She laughed bitterly, cutting him off. Once the business stabilizes? That's what you said last year, and the year before. Your business will never stabilize because you'll never stop. There will always be another deal, another crisis, another excuse not to be here. Ethan felt like he was losing control, something he hated more than anything. So, what do you want me to do, Claire? Just walk away from everything I built. I want you to fight for me the way you fight for your empire, she said, tears streaming down her face now. Her words landed like a blow. For a moment, silence filled the room, broken only by the crackling fire. But Ethan, stubborn, proud, unable to bend, crossed his arms. If that's how you feel, maybe you should go. The words hung in the air like a death sentence. Claire stared at him, shocked. Is that what you really want? He hesitated. A part of him wanted to take it back immediately, to pull her into his arms and beg her to stay. But his pride, his damn pride, wouldn't let him. Yes, he said finally, his voice colder than he meant it to be. Claire's face crumpled, as though he had physically struck her. She nodded slowly, wiping her tears. Then you've made your choice. She turned and walked upstairs. A few minutes later, Ethan heard drawers opening and closing, the sound of a suitcase zipper. When she came back down, she was holding a single bag. Her face was pale, her shoulders trembling, but her voice was steady when she said, I don't want your alimony. I don't want your money. I just want my peace. And then she left. Ethan stood there in the empty living room, staring at the door long after closed, waiting for her to come back. She didn't. For weeks, he told himself she just needed time, that she'd return once she cooled off. But days turned into months, and Claire never came back. And Ethan never went after her. He threw himself into work harder than ever, building deal after deal, trying to fill the void she left behind. But no amount of money, no new acquisitions, no celebration dinners could drown the echo of that night, or erase the image of her walking out the door. Now, standing on this road, watching her soaked figure in the rain, he felt every ounce of regret crash down on him. He had let her go, and maybe, just maybe, tonight was his only chance to make it right. The rain came down harder, as if the heavens themselves were trying to wash the world clean. Ethan stood there, half sheltered by the car door, his expensive suit quickly soaking through, his polished shoes sinking slightly into the muddy roadside. He could hear the pounding of his own heart over the roar of the storm. For a long moment, he simply stared at her. Claire, every cell in his body screamed to run to her, to scoop her into his arms, to apologize for every sleepless night she'd endured without him. But there was another voice, colder, sharper, whispering in his ear, reminding him of how she had walked away, how she had left him standing alone in that empty house. She hadn't called. She hadn't written. She hadn't looked back. Why should he be the one to step forward first? His jaw tightened, his breath fogging in the cool night air. The Ethan Maxwell of 2 years ago would have driven past without stopping, telling himself she had made her choice and that it was none of his concern. That man had mastered the art of locking up his feelings and throwing away the key. But tonight, something was different. He wasn't just seeing the woman who had left him. He was seeing a woman who was carrying life. Her shoulders were hunched against the rain, her face pale, her body trembling from cold. The way her hand rested over her belly wasn't just protective. It was desperate, almost instinctive, like a mother shielding her child from the cruelty of the world. And suddenly, the memory of that night they'd fought came flooding back, sharper than ever. her voice breaking as she said she just wanted him, her eyes full of hurt as she walked out the door. He remembered what she looked like from behind as she left. So small, so alone, and how he had stood frozen, too proud to follow her, convincing himself he was giving her space. But in truth, he had been giving himself an excuse. And now here she was again, standing in front of him in the middle of a storm, and he felt like the universe was handing him one last chance. This was not the time to stay frozen. Ethan swallowed hard and stepped out from behind the car door, fully exposed to the rain now. The cold hit him like a slap, but he didn't care. His shoes splashed through puddles as he walked closer. His heart pounded harder with every step. Claire. Her head snapped up at the sound of his voice, her hair plastered against her cheeks. For a brief, breathless second, they simply stared at each other. Lightning lit up the sky, casting her face in stark relief. He could see her expression clearly now. The way her eyes widened in shock, the way her lips parted slightly as though she had been caught off guard. "Ethan," she said, her voice barely audible over the storm. He nodded, his throat tightening. "It's me." Her body stiffened. She turned her face slightly away, as if preparing for a blow. He stopped just a few feet from her, rain dripping from his hair and running down his face. His chest ached from the effort of keeping his voice steady. "You can't stand here like this. You'll get sick," he said, shouting slightly to be heard over the wind. Her arms tightened around her belly, her eyes narrowing. "What does it matter to you?" The words cut deeper than he expected. He could have gotten angry, the old Ethan would have. He could have reminded her that she was the one who left, that she had made this bed she was lying in. But when he looked at her again, really looked at her, he saw how pale she was, how exhausted. Her dress clung to her body. Her fingers were shaking. This wasn't a woman standing strong in her decision. This was a woman who looked like she had been through battle after battle and had barely survived. And then there was a child. For a brief moment, Ethan let himself imagine what it would be like if that child was his. The thought both thrilled and terrified him. He could see himself teaching the baby to walk through the halls of the mansion, could imagine tiny hands grabbing his fingers, could imagine laughter filling the house again. But what if it wasn't his? Could he handle that? Could he look at her every day and know she had built a life with someone else, even if it had fallen apart? His heart was a battlefield of questions and fears. But one truth cut through all the noise. He could not leave her here. If he drove away, he knew he would never forgive himself. He had already failed her once. He could not fail her again. "Claire," he said, taking another step closer. The mud clung to his shoes, the rain soaking through his clothes. But he didn't care. "Please, get in the car. We can talk later, fight later. I don't care. But right now, you need to get out of this rain." Her chin trembled, but her eyes burned with something fierce. "You don't get to tell me what I need, Ethan. You don't get to suddenly show up and play the hero. Where were you when I needed you 2 years ago?" Her words struck him like a punch to the gut, but he forced himself not to look away. "I was a fool," he admitted, his voice rough. "I thought giving you space was what you wanted. I thought burying myself in work was easier than facing what I had done to us. But I can't undo that now. All I can do is be here, right now, and make sure you don't collapse in the middle of this storm." For a long, tense moment, she just stared at him. Rain streamed down her face, mingling with tears he couldn't tell were from pain or anger. Her silence felt like an eternity. Then another bolt of lightning split the sky, followed by a deep rumble of thunder that seemed to shake the ground beneath them. Claire flinched, her arms tightening around her belly instinctively. That was the moment Ethan decided. He closed the distance between them, gently placing a hand on her shoulder. "Please," he said again, softer this time, almost pleading, "just let me get you out of the rain." Something in his voice, maybe the vulnerability, maybe the sincerity, seemed to pierce through the wall she had built around herself. Her shoulders sagged slightly, as though the fight had drained out of her. She didn't nod, but she didn't pull away either. It was enough. Ethan exhaled in relief, guiding her gently toward the car. The rain continued to pour, soaking them both to the bone, but for the first time in years, Ethan felt like he was exactly where he was supposed to be, Not in some boardroom, not on a jet, but here, with her. The moment Claire sank into the passenger seat, the warmth of the car's heater fogged the windows, but the tension between them was ice cold. Water dripped from their hair and clothes, pooling on the leather seats. The sound of rain on the roof now muffled but still present. A soft, relentless drumming, as if the storm outside had followed them in. Ethan sat in the driver's seat, gripping the wheel even though the car wasn't moving. His knuckles were white, his jaw tight, his chest rising and falling with unsteady breaths. He wanted to speak, needed to, but the words stuck in his throat like splinters. Claire stared straight ahead, her arms wrapped protectively around her belly, refusing to look at him. The silence was unbearable. Finally, Ethan forced the words out. "Claire, you..." "Don't." She cut him off sharply, her voice cracking like a whip. He flinched at the sound. "Don't act like you suddenly care now," she continued, her voice shaking with rage. "Where was this concern when I was crying myself to sleep every night in that empty house? Where was this urgency when I begged you to spend just one evening with me, without your phone glued to your hand?" Ethan turned to face her, his throat tight. "I cared. God, Claire, I always cared." "Cared?" She laughed bitterly, her voice rising. "You cared about mergers, acquisitions, stock prices. You cared about making sure everyone out there saw you as the perfect billionaire with a perfect life. But me? I was just an accessory in the background of your empire, something you could put on a shelf and take down when it was convenient for you." Her words landed like blows, each one sharper than the last. "That's not fair," Ethan said, his voice lower now, almost pleading. "I worked for us, Claire, for our future. I wanted to give you everything." Her head snapped toward him, her wet hair sticking to her cheeks. "I never asked for everything, Ethan. I never wanted the mansion or the jets or the endless charity galas where I had to smile like a trophy wife while you talk business with strangers. I just wanted a husband who was there, who saw me, who remembered what my favorite tea was without the housekeeper reminding him." Ethan's chest tightened painfully. "I was trying to build something that would last forever." Her voice softened, but her words cut even deeper. "You were so busy building a future that you forgot to live in the present with me. Do you know what that feels like? To be sitting in the most beautiful house in the city and feel completely invisible? To be in a room with the man you love and still feel utterly alone?" Her hands trembled as she wiped her face, though it was hard to tell whether the wetness on her skin was from tears or rain. "I thought leaving would wake you up," she whispered. "I thought maybe if I walked away, you'd come after me, that you'd fight for me the way you fought for every deal you ever closed." Ethan's heart dropped like a stone. "But you didn't," she said, her voice breaking. "You let me go, and that was when I realized that maybe I had never really been a priority to you at all." Her words were a knife twisting in his gut. He wanted to argue, to tell her she was wrong, that she had always been the center of his world, but he couldn't, because deep down, he knew there had been truth in every word she had said. He hadn't chased her. He had stayed in that empty house, convincing himself she just needed time, that she'd come back on her own. But the truth was simpler and uglier. Chasing her would have meant admitting he was wrong, that he had failed her. And Ethan Maxwell was not a man who liked to admit failure. Until now. "You're right," he said finally, his voice raw. Claire blinked, startled by the sudden admission. "You're right about everything," he continued, turning fully to face her. "I didn't fight for you. I didn't follow you. And every single day since you left, I've regretted it." His voice cracked, the weight of 2 years of regret pouring out of him. "I thought I was doing the right thing, giving you space. I thought burying myself in work would make the pain easier. But it didn't. It just made the house quieter, the nights longer, and the regret heavier." Claire stared at him, her chest rising and falling rapidly. "I miss you every day," Ethan said, his voice soft now. "I miss your laugh, your voice, the way you made the house feel alive. I miss waking up and finding you curled up on the couch with a blanket, drinking tea and watching the rain." His hand tightened on the steering wheel. "And I hated myself for not chasing you when I had the chance." For a moment, the only sound in the car was the patter of rain and their uneven breathing. Claire looked away, biting her lip, Her hand instinctively went to her belly again, rubbing small circles as if to calm herself. Ethan followed the motion with his eyes, his chest aching. "Is it mine?" he asked, barely above a whisper. The question hung in the air like a live wire. Claire's breath hitched. She didn't answer right away, her eyes closing briefly as though she were weighing whether she owed him the truth at all. Then, finally, she nodded. "Yes, this is your child." Ethan's breath caught. "I found out after I left," she continued, her voice trembling. "I thought about telling you 100 times. But then I'd think about coming back to that house, to the silence, to the empty bed, and I couldn't do it. I didn't want my baby to grow up a father who was never home, a man who thought love was something you could buy with money." Her words hit him harder than any business failure ever had. He closed his eyes for a long moment, letting the truth sink in. He hadn't just lost Claire. He had almost lost a chance to know his own child. When he opened his eyes again, there was no pride left in him, only desperation. "Claire," he said, his voice breaking, "I can't change the past. I can't erase the nights you cried or the times I wasn't there. But please, don't shut me out of this too. Don't let me miss this. I want to be there. For you, for the baby, for everything." Claire's walls trembled. She wanted to stay angry, to cling to the pain that had kept her going these past 2 years. But looking at Ethan now, really looking at him, she saw something she hadn't seen in a long time. He wasn't the untouchable billionaire anymore. He wasn't the man who had stood there stone-faced as she packed her suitcase. He was vulnerable, broken even, and for the first time, she felt like maybe he truly understood what he had lost. She didn't answer right away. Instead, she turned back to the window, watching the rain slide down the glass like silver tears. But her silence wasn't rejection this time. It was hesitation. And that, for Ethan, was enough to keep hoping. The car sat motionless on the empty road, the rain slowing from a downpour to a soft drizzle, as though even the sky had grown tired of crying. Inside, the air was thick with everything unsaid, with pain and longing and the ghost of a love that refused to die. Ethan's knuckles loosened from the steering wheel as he turned toward Claire. For years he'd been the man everyone feared, the one who never broke, never faltered, never let emotion sway his decisions. But now, none of that power mattered. All that mattered was a woman sitting next to him, her face turned away, her hand resting protectively on the life she carried, their child. "Claire," he said quietly, his voice hoarse, "look at me." She didn't move. "Please," he added, the single word sounding almost foreign in his mouth. He couldn't remember the last time he had begged anyone for anything. Slowly, she turned her head. Her eyes were red and tired, but behind them burned a storm every bit as fierce as the one that had raged outside. "What do you want from me, Ethan?" she asked, her tone sharp but brittle. "An apology? You have it. I believe you regret what you did or didn't do, but regret doesn't change the fact that I had to learn to survive without you." Her words pierced him, but he didn't flinch. Instead, he leaned closer, his voice low and raw. "I don't want an apology. I want my family back. I want you back. I want to make this right, not in words, but in actions. Tell me what I have to do, and I'll do it." Claire shook her head, tears spilling down her cheeks. "It's not that simple." "Then make it simple," he said, his voice breaking. "Strip everything else away. Forget the money, the company, the name. Just look at me, Claire. Do you still love me?" The question hit her like a physical blow. Her lips parted, but no sound came out. For a moment, she hated him for asking it, for dragging into the light the very thing she had tried to bury under anger and distance. "Love doesn't fix everything," she whispered. "It fixes enough," Ethan said fiercely, his eyes locking onto hers. "If there's even a part of you that still loves me, I'll spend every day proving that I can be the man you need me to be." Claire's heart ached. She wanted to believe him, but memories of lonely nights, unanswered calls, and broken promises rose up like shadows between them. "You say that now," she said bitterly. "But what happens in a month? In 6 months? When another deal comes along, when the board calls, when the company needs you, what happens then? Do I get pushed aside all over again?" Ethan's hands trembled as he reached across the console, gently covering hers. No, not this time. I'll walk away from all of it if I have to. Claire blinked at him, stunned. You'd walk away from Maxwell Industries? I'd burn to the ground if it meant keeping you, Ethan said, his voice shaking with conviction. The company doesn't keep me warm at night. It doesn't make me laugh or calm me down when I'm about to lose my mind. It doesn't look at me like I'm more than just a man with the money. You do. You always did. And I was too blind to see it until I lost you. The dam inside him finally broke. For 2 years I've been haunted by the sound of your footsteps leaving that night, he confessed, tears brimming in his own eyes. Every time I came home and saw that suitcase gone, every time I walked past your side of bed and found it cold, it killed me a little more, and I told myself I deserved it because I failed you. But I can't keep living like that. I can't keep pretending I'm fine. I'm not fine, Claire. I haven't been fine since the day you left. Claire's breathing quickened, her own tears falling freely now. She had waited for this moment, dreamed of him saying these words, but now that they were here, it terrified her, because if she let herself believe him and he failed her again, it would destroy her. I don't know if I can trust you, she said finally, her voice small. I don't know if I can trust us. Ethan nodded slowly, as though he expected that answer. Then let me earn it back. Day by day, choice by choice. I'm not asking you to forgive me tonight. I'm asking you to let me try. Her hand moved instinctively to her belly again, and Ethan followed the motion with his eyes. Let me be there when our baby takes their first breath, he whispered. Let me be the one to wake up at 3 a.m. when they cry. Let me be the father I should have been the first moment you found out. His words cracked something open in her. For so long she had carried the weight alone. The doctor's appointments, the morning sickness, the late-night fears of how she would raise a child by herself. She had convinced herself she didn't need him, that she was strong enough to do this on her own. But sitting here now, with him so broken, so desperate, she realized part of her had always wanted to fight for them, and he was fighting now. A sob escaped her unbidden as she pressed her hands to her face. Ethan's heart twisted at the sound. Without thinking, he reached out and gently pulled her into his arms. For a second, she resisted, her body stiff. But then the dam inside her burst too, and she let herself collapse against him, her tears soaking his shirt. They stayed like that for what felt like forever. Two people clinging to each other as though the storm might sweep them away if they let go. When Claire finally pulled back, her face was streaked with tears, but softer somehow. This doesn't mean everything's okay, she said, her voice still shaking. I know, Ethan replied gently. And it doesn't mean I'm coming back home tonight. He nodded again, accepting it without protest. I'll wait, as long as it takes. Claire looked into his eyes, searching for any hint of the man who had once put his work above everything. All she saw was a man stripped of pride, a man who looked at her as though she was his whole world. For the first time in a long time, she believed him. Take me to my place, she said finally. We can talk more tomorrow. Ethan exhaled shakily, relief washing over him like a wave. Tomorrow, he repeated, as though the word itself was a promise. He started the car, and for the first time all night, the road ahead didn't feel so dark. The next morning, the storm had passed, leaving Pennsylvania bathed in a pale, silvery light. The streets were still wet, puddles reflecting the early sun like shards of glass. Ethan Maxwell stood outside a modest apartment building, his usual designer suit replaced with dark jeans, a simple shirt, and a jacket. No chauffeur, no entourage, no armor. He stared at the buzzer for a long moment before pressing it. There had been a time when he could walk into any room, any board meeting, and command attention without a second thought. But standing here, about to face Claire again, he felt nervous in a way he hadn't felt since he was a young man starting his first business. The speaker crackled. Who is it? Her voice was calm, guarded. It's me, Ethan said softly. A pause. Then, the faint buzz of the door unlocking. He climbed the stairs slowly, taking in the building's worn walls and narrow halls. It was a far cry from the marble floors and crystal chandeliers of their old life together. And yet, there was something strangely grounding about it. When Claire opened the door, she looked different than last night. Her hair was damp, her face clean and fresh, but there was still a tiredness in her eyes. She wore a loose sweater and leggings, her hand resting unconsciously on her belly. "Come in," she said simply. Ethan stepped inside, his eyes scanning the small apartment. It was warm and cozy, filled with books, plants, and soft light. A faint scent of tea lingered in the air. For a moment, he felt a pang, not because it was so different from the mansion, but because it felt like her. "This is nice," he said quietly. "It's home," she replied, leading him to the small kitchen table. They sat across from each other, the morning light falling between them like a fragile bridge. For a moment, neither spoke. The silence wasn't hostile like last night, but cautious, as though any wrong word might shatter the fragile peace they had found. "I didn't sleep much," Claire said finally, her hands wrapped around a mug of tea. "Me neither," Ethan admitted. "I kept thinking about what you said, about how lonely you felt, about how I let you go without a fight." Claire looked at him, her gaze sharp but less cold. "You can't just erase 2 years of hurt with one speech in a car." "I know," Ethan said quickly. "I don't expect forgiveness overnight, but I want to start somewhere. I want to do better, to be better, not just for you, but for our baby." His eyes drifted to her belly, and something in his expression softened. "I miss so much already. The first doctor's visit, the ultrasounds, everything. I don't want to miss another moment." Claire looked down at her mug, her fingers tightening around it. She wanted to stay angry. Anger was safe. It kept her from getting hurt again. But she couldn't ignore the sincerity in his voice, or the way his usual arrogance seemed completely gone. "I've been doing this alone," she said softly. "It's been hard, Ethan. Harder than I ever imagined. There were nights when I want to call you so badly it hurt. But then I'd remember the way I used to sit alone in that house, waiting for you to come home, and I'd hang up before I dialed." Ethan's chest ached. "I don't want to be the reason you feel that way again," he said. "If that means stepping back from the company, I will. If it means selling half my shares, walking away from deals, letting someone else run things, I'll do it. Whatever it takes to make you feel like you and this baby come first." Claire's brows furrowed. "Do you even know what that means? You spent your whole life building Maxwell Industries. Walking away from that isn't just a decision. It's a transformation. Are you really ready for that?" Ethan didn't hesitate. "Yes, because all of this, the money, the success, the power, it means nothing if I don't have someone to share it with. It means nothing if my child grows up thinking their father loved his company more than his family." His words hung in the air, heavy and real. Claire looked at him for a long moment, searching for any hint of performance or manipulation. But all she saw was a man stripped bare, a man who had been humbled not by failure in business, but by failure in love. "You can't just make promises, Ethan," she said finally. "You have to follow through. This isn't about a grand gesture or some romantic speech. It's about consistency. It's about showing up every day, even when it's inconvenient." "I know," Ethan said softly. "Let me show you, not with words, but with actions. Give me one chance to prove that I can be the man you need." Claire hesitated, her heart torn between fear and longing. "I don't know if I can move back into that mansion," she admitted. "Not yet. Too many memories. Too much pain." "Then I'll come here," Ethan said without missing a beat. "Or I'll find a place nearby. Whatever makes you feel comfortable. I don't care where I am, as long as I get to be close to you and the baby." For the first time, a small, tentative smile tugged at Claire's lips. "You're really not going to give up, are you?" she asked quietly. "Not this time," Ethan said, leaning forward, his eyes locked on hers. "I gave up once, and it was the worst mistake of my life. I'm not making it again." Something inside Claire shifted. She had spent so long holding on to anger that she had forgotten what hope felt like. It scared her, but it also warmed her in a way she hadn't expected. "All right," she said finally, "one step at a time. We'll see where this goes." Ethan's shoulders sagged with relief, and for the first time in years, he allowed himself a real, unguarded smile. "Thank you," he said simply, the words heavy with gratitude. They sat there a little longer, sipping tea, talking quietly about practical things. The next doctor's appointment, the baby's due date, small pieces of a life that might just be rebuilt. For the first time in 2 years, Ethan felt like he could breathe as he left the apartment later that morning. The sun had broken fully through the clouds, lighting up the wet streets in a golden glow. And for the first time in a long time, the future didn't feel like a burden he had to build alone. It felt like a road they might walk together. The next morning, Ethan Maxwell stood at the head of the massive boardroom table, staring at the rows of expectant faces staring back at him. These were the men and women who had helped him build Maxwell Industries into an empire, the people who had watched him close billion-dollar deals with steady hands and cold precision. But today, there was something different in his stance. "Before we start," Ethan said, his voice calm but carrying a weight that silenced the room, "I have something to say." The board members exchanged glances. Ethan never spoke before the agenda started. He never wasted a second. "I know this company has been my life for the last 10 years, he continued. "But that stops today." Murmurs rippled across the room. "I'm not walking away," Ethan clarified, "but I am stepping back. Effective immediately, I'll be delegating a significant portion of my day-to-day responsibilities to the executive team. I will still be involved in major decisions, but I will no longer be available 24/7. My family will come first." The room went completely silent. One of the board members, an older man named Harris, frowned. "With all due respect, Ethan, this company runs on your vision. You're the face of Maxwell Industries. Are you sure this is wise?" "I'm sure," Ethan said firmly. "If this company can't function without me breathing down its neck every second of the day, then I haven't built it as well as I thought." His tone softened. "I built Maxwell Industries to give me freedom, not to chain me to a desk. Somewhere along the way, I forgot that, but I'm done forgetting." No one dared argue further. They had seen Ethan fight tooth and nail for every percentage point of profit, but today there was a different kind of fire in his eyes, one that told him this wasn't negotiable. When the meeting adjourned, Ethan walked out of the skyscraper with an unfamiliar sense of lightness. For the first time in years, his phone wasn't buzzing with constant updates, and he didn't feel the compulsion to check it every 5 minutes. Instead, he got into his car and drove straight to Claire's apartment. She was surprised to see him standing at her door in the middle of the day. "You're supposed to be at work," she said, brows raised. "I was," he said, stepping inside. "But I told the board I'm stepping back." Claire blinked. "You what?" "I told them I'm done living at the office. From now on, I'm going to be present. For you, for the baby, for everything that matters." Claire stared at him, trying to read his face, to see if this was just another one of his grand speeches. But there was something different about him today, a quiet determination, not the showy kind that came with closing a deal, but the kind that came from a man who had decided to change. "That's a big step," she said cautiously. "It's just the first," Ethan said. "I want to go with you to the next doctor's appointment." "When is it?" Claire hesitated, then reached for the calendar on the fridge. "Friday morning." "I'll be there," he said immediately. "No matter what." She wanted to believe him, but part of her still doubted. After all, she had heard promises before. Friday came faster than she expected. Claire sat in the waiting room, her heart pounding. She kept glancing at the door, half convinced he wouldn't show. But then, right on time, Ethan walked in, not in his usual suit, but dressed casually, his phone turned completely off. He sat beside her, his expression a mix of nervousness and awe. "First appointment I've been to," he admitted softly. Claire glanced at him. "You don't have to be nervous." "I'm terrified," he said with a small, almost sheepish smile, but in a good way. When the nurse called him back, Ethan stayed close, his hand brushing against hers. And when the doctor turned the monitor toward them and the rhythmic sound of their baby's heartbeat filled the room, Ethan's entire world seemed to stop. He had heard the sound of stock markets opening, of boardroom applause, of journalists calling his name, but nothing compared to this. He blinked rapidly, and Claire caught the glint of tears in his eyes. "That's ours?" he asked, his voice breaking. Claire nodded, her throat too tight to speak. In that moment, something inside Ethan shifted permanently. This wasn't about regret anymore. This wasn't about just making up for the past. This was about building something better, not with money, but with time, with presence, with love. When they left the clinic, Ethan insisted on taking her to lunch. It was nothing fancy, just a small cafe down the street, but it was warm and quiet. And for once, he wasn't distracted by calls or meetings. "How are you feeling?" he asked, genuinely listening as she talked about the pregnancy, the cravings, the little fears she had been carrying alone. By the end of lunch, Claire found herself smiling, really smiling, for the first time in months. Over the next week, Ethan kept showing up. He called just to ask how she was feeling. He brought groceries to her apartment. He left work early to sit with her and watch old movies, sometimes falling asleep on the couch, one hand resting protectively on her belly. One evening, as he was washing dishes in her small kitchen, Claire watched him quietly, her heart tightening. He looked so out of place in the cramped space. The billionaire who had always been surrounded by chefs and staff, now scrubbing plates with rolled-up sleeves. But he didn't complain. He just worked silently, a small smile on his face, as though he were exactly where he wanted to be. It was then that Claire realized he wasn't just saying he had changed. He was proving it, little by little, day by day. When he turned and caught her staring, he froze for a moment. "What?" he asked, smiling softly. She shook her head, a lump forming in her throat. "Nothing. Just thank you." "For what?" "For being here," she said simply. Ethan's chest tightened, and he crossed the room to gently kiss her forehead. "I'm not going anywhere," he said. "Not this time." And for the first time since the night she had left him, Claire believed it. It had been 3 weeks since the doctor's appointment, and in that time, Ethan had done everything he said he would do. He came to every checkup, brought Claire healthy meals, and even sat through long evenings of birthing documentaries without complaint. He didn't just show up physically. He was present, really present. Claire found herself looking forward to his visits, though she still reminded herself not to rush, not to fall too quickly into the comfort of the life they once had. But one Saturday morning, something shifted. Claire stood in the baby's room, or what would soon be the baby's room, staring at the half-empty space. She had bought a crib, still unassembled, and a few tiny clothes that hung from a rack in the corner. The room was small, cozy, but it didn't feel ready. When the doorbell rang, she found Ethan standing there holding 2 large bags and a mischievous smile. "What's all this?" she asked. "Supplies," he said, stepping inside. "I thought we could work on the nursery today." Claire blinked, surprised. "You want to build furniture?" "I do," he said with a grin. "Unless you'd rather trust me with power tools, which, for everyone's safety, might not be the best idea." She laughed despite herself, and the sound felt good. "All right," she said, "but don't blame me if we end up with a lopsided crib." They spent the morning together, unpacking boxes, sorting through baby clothes, and assembling the crib. Ethan fumbled with the instruction manual more than once, earning teasing smiles from Claire. "You're supposed to be good at building things," she said, arching an eyebrow as he struggled with a stubborn screw. "I build companies, not cribs," he shot back, his tone light. "Though, honestly, this feels harder." By the time they finished, the sun was setting, and the small room looked transformed. The crib stood proudly in the corner, a soft blanket draped over the edge. The tiny clothes were neatly folded, and a rocking chair sat by the window. Claire stood in the doorway, her arms crossed, tears welling up in her eyes. "It looks perfect," she whispered. Ethan glanced at her, his expression softening. "So, do you," he said quietly. For a moment, she didn't look away. There was something in his gaze, tender, reverent, that made her heart ache. "Ethan," she started, but her voice trailed off. He didn't push. Instead, he walked over and stood beside her, both of them staring at the room in silence. "This is real," he said after a long moment. "We're going to be parents." Claire nodded, her hand instinctively resting on her belly. "Do you ever get scared?" she asked softly. "All the time," he admitted. "But then I think about everything we've already been through, everything we survived, and I figure we can handle this too." She turned her head toward him, her lips curling into a small, tentative smile. "Do you want to stay for dinner?" she asked suddenly. Ethan blinked, surprised. This was the first time she had asked him to stay instead of him offering. "I'd like that," he said. Dinner was simple, pasta and salad, but to Ethan it felt like a feast. They sat at the tiny kitchen table, laughing and talking about baby names, about paint colors in the nursery, about whether the baby would inherit Claire's hazel eyes or Ethan's dark ones. Afterward, they moved to the couch, and for the first time since their separation, Claire let herself relax against him. His arms slid around her shoulders naturally, and she rested her head against his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. "You've changed," she said quietly. "I had to," Ethan replied. "I couldn't keep living like I was. I was too afraid to admit it before, but losing you was a wake-up call I needed." Claire lifted her head to look at him, her eyes searching his face. "Do you ever resent me for leaving?" He shook his head. "No, I resent myself for giving you a reason to." The honesty in his voice made her throat tighten. "I wanted to hate you," she confessed softly. "For a long time, I told myself you didn't deserve another chance. But the truth is, I never stopped loving you." Ethan's breath caught, his heart pounding in his chest. "I love you, Claire," he said, the words almost a vow. "I think I always will." Tears pricked her eyes, but this time they weren't from pain. For the first time since that awful night she had left the mansion, she felt something break open inside her, not the ache of loss, but the fragile beginnings of hope. When he left that night, he didn't try to kiss her or push for anything more. He simply held her hands, pressed a soft kiss to her forehead, and promised to come back tomorrow. And for the first time in a long time, Claire wanted him to. Over the next week, their routine deepened. Ethan took her shopping for more baby things, insisting on carrying all the bags himself. They spent quiet evenings cooking together, talking about everything and nothing. Each moment felt like a small step back toward each other, like bricks being laid on a bridge that had once been shattered. One night, as they stood in the nursery, Claire reached out and took his hand. "Ethan," she said softly, her voice almost trembling, "I think I'm ready for you to come back home." He froze, his breath catching. "Are you sure?" he asked carefully. She nodded, tears shining in her eyes. "Yes, but only if you promise that home will feel different this time. No more empty dinners. No more falling asleep alone." Ethan cupped her face in his hands, his voice thick with emotion. "I promise. You and this baby will never come second again." And for the first time, Claire believed him completely. The day Claire agreed to let Ethan come home, something in both of them shifted. It wasn't just about him carrying his suitcase back into the mansion. It was about walking back into a shared life. This time, with eyes wide open. The first night back, Claire stood in the master bedroom, watching as Ethan carefully hung up the last of his shirts. He moved slowly, almost reverently, as though he was afraid to disturb the fragile peace they had rebuilt. "You can relax," Claire said gently, sitting on the edge of the bed. He turned and gave her a small, almost boyish smile. "I just don't want to mess this up." "You won't," she said softly. When he crossed the room to sit beside her, there was no tension, no sharp edges like before. Instead, there was quiet, a kind of stillness that felt like safety. Over the next few weeks, life began to take on a rhythm again. Ethan made a point to be home by dinner every night. He turned down meetings that interfered with Claire's doctor's appointments. The mansion, once cold and silent, now felt warm again. The lights always on, the sound of laughter filling the halls. One evening, as the first snow of winter began to fall, Ethan walked into the nursery where Claire was sitting in the rocking chair, knitting a small blanket. He leaned against the doorway for a moment, just watching her. She looked so peaceful, her face illuminated by the soft glow of the lamp. "What are you smiling at?" she asked without looking up. "You," he said simply. "You look happy." She paused, then looked up at him, a slow smile spreading across her face. "I am." He crossed the room, knelt beside the chair, and rested his head against her belly. "Hi, little one," he murmured, his voice soft. "It's your dad. We're waiting for you. Take your time, but we can't wait to meet you." Claire's throat tightened, and she reached down to run her fingers through his hair. It was a quiet, perfect moment, one she never thought they'd have again. But as the due date drew closer, the old fears crept back into Claire's mind. Would he really keep this up once the baby came? Would life get too busy again? She didn't have much time to dwell on it. One cold February night, Claire woke to a sharp pain in her lower back. Within minutes, she realized she was in labor. "Ethan," she called, her voice trembling. He was at her side instantly, already pulling on his coat. "It's time." "It's time," she said, her voice shaking, part fear, part excitement. He helped her into the car and drove carefully but quickly through the snowy streets, one hand on the wheel, the other holding hers. "I'm right here," he said over and over. "I'm not going anywhere." At the hospital, hours seemed to blur together. Claire gripped his hand through every contraction, her face slick with sweat, her breath coming in short gasps. Ethan never left her side. He whispered encouragement, wiped her forehead, kissed her hair, and let her crush his hand until his knuckles turned white. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the sound of a newborn's cry filled the room. Claire broke into tears as the nurse placed their tiny daughter on her chest. Ethan stared, his vision swimming, completely undone by the sight. "She's perfect," he whispered, his voice breaking. Claire looked up at him, exhausted but smiling. "Want to hold her?" He nodded wordlessly, his hands trembling as he cradled the tiny bundle. For a long moment, he just stood there, staring at her in awe. "Hi, sweetheart," he murmured, his voice thick. "I'm your dad, and I promise I'm going to be here every single day." Claire watched him, her heart so full it hurt. In that moment, all the pain, all the loneliness, all the months of wondering if she made a mistake, they all melted away. When they brought the baby home 2 days later, the mansion no longer felt like a cold monument to Ethan's wealth. It felt alive. Ethan had transformed the living room into a cozy family space, with a bassinet near the fireplace and soft blankets everywhere. That first night, Claire woke in the middle of the night to find Ethan rocking the baby by the window, humming softly under his breath. "You should be sleeping," she whispered. He glanced back at her with a quiet smile. "I don't want to miss this," he said. Not a single moment. Claire walked over and rested her head on his shoulder, watching their daughter sleep in his arms. "This is all I ever wanted," she whispered. He kissed the top of her head. "Me too." Weeks passed, and their new life settled into a gentle, beautiful routine. Ethan would get up early to take the baby, so Claire could sleep. They spent weekends going for quiet walks through the snow, their daughter bundled between them. And every night, before bed, Ethan would sit with Claire in the nursery, his arm around her as they watched their baby sleep. One evening, Claire turned to him and said softly, "You kept your promise." He met her gaze, his own eyes shining. "I'll keep it every day for the rest of my life." In that moment, Claire realized that this wasn't just a second chance. This was a new life, one built not on wealth or appearances, but on love, patience, and presence. Ethan wasn't just the man she had married years ago. He was better, stronger, softer, and as she leaned against him, her heart full, she knew that no storm, no rain, no past mistakes could ever break them again.